Good afternoon. My name is Manuel Camargo, and this is a meeting of the Glendale Water and Power Commission. Today is March 6th. So, Madam Clerk, can we move to the first item on the agenda, please?
Roll call. Commissioner Avanesian.
Here.
Commissioner Hale.
Here.
Commissioner Chan.
Present.
Commissioner Lall.
Here.
President Camargo.
Here. Very good. Next item, please.
2A, approval of the February 6, 2017 minutes.
Any comments from the commissioners on the meeting minutes? I was not present. Anything?
No changes for me.
Okay. Very good. So it's the only item on the consent calendar, so we can approve all items on the consent calendar with a vote. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Second?
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Very good. Next item, please.
3, GWP Commission staff comments.
Mr. Zurn, anything you have?
I have nothing.
Commissioners, any opening comments? Nope. Hearing none. Next item, please. I'm going to come to that at
Okay.
at the end.
4, reports. 4A, legislative update.
Hello, President Camargo, members of the Commission, April Fitzpatrick, Assistant General Manager. I'm here today to present you with a legislative update, as promised from our last meeting, with all the bills that were turned in on the state side by February 17th. Steve, Ramon, and I were in Washington, D.C. last week, and we attended an APPA legislative event where we had an opportunity to hear from and meet with senators and their staff. There is a whole slew of items to watch at the federal level, with the first one being the protecting of the municipal bond exception through tax reform. This affects not only utilities but cities as well. If it were to pass, we would be subject to taxes on the interest portion. This could present a bunch of financial issues for the city where the borrowing costs would become more expensive. We may be limited on investments in critical infrastructure, as well as raise rates to our customers. Another item that was big on the list is, of course, grid and cybersecurity. We support threat mitigation, which is also known as defense in depth, which focuses on prevention and recovery to hazards to grid operations. The existing Federal Power Act process where sectors are subject to technical standards and the Cybersecurity Act of 2015 will help us further identify and protect against threats. And the last item I'm going to share with you on the federal side is pole attachments. The FCC wants the authority to limit the rates for cable and telecom connections. And from an aesthetic and rate-based perspective, we want to determine our own costs and also make the determination what goes on our poles. From the state legislative side, the session is now underway. There is, again, a whole slew of items that were submitted by that deadline. We're watching several of them. There's just too many to share with all of you. Some are recurring themed at this meeting that I've shared with you in the past. One, of course, being the natural gas moratorium for Aliso Canyon, SB 57. Now apparently there is another bill, AB 1516, which is related to mitigation and how the funds should be spent. And the City of LA supports this bill at all levels. Another item is SB 584, the California Renewable Portfolio Standard. It's still very limited on the information. It's a bill that's a placeholder, but they have stated that they would like to accelerate 50% RPS target to 2025 instead of 2030 and set 100% by 2045. Another new bill that was submitted is AB 241, titled Personal Information, Privacy, State and Local Agency, where in summary, if we were the source of a breach of Social Security, driver's license, or California ID, we may potentially be required to identify theft prevention and mitigation services for no less than 12 months. It also provides this bill prescriptive notice requirements and language. On the water side of our business, there was submitted a new bill by Friedman, AB 1667, where urban water supplier, it's titled Urban Water Suppliers Landscape Water Meters, where the bill would require single-family residence, commercial, institutional, industrial, and multifamily meters with separate connections for irrigation. And the requirement in this bill would have it installed before January 1st, 2020. This bill sets specific standards based on square footage of landscape size and meter requirements. Another water bill, SB 623, is Safe and Affordable Drinking Water Fund bill, where it takes the existing bill, the existing law, and creates a separate water fund. And this would make an appropriation and a possible vehicle for a public goods charge. And the bill is really only 2 sentences long, so there will be more on this at a later date. So we're still very early in the process. They break out for recess on April 6th, and then they reconvene on April 17th. Do you have any questions?
Questions on any of the legislation?
So on the Friedman bill on
Yes.
the water metering, is that for retrofit too, or does that apply to new construction?
I believe it's new construction.
New. So it's new construction.
Oh, is it
after,
only-
new
okay.
construction after 2020 would be required.
Oh, okay. I misunderstood the bill.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Just to recap, the big takeaway on this on the federal level is the tax-exempt muni bonds. That's huge. It's huge for water and power, and it's huge for the city of Glendale and every other city, county in the state of California. This is what finances infrastructure: roads, water, electricity, sewers. And so the idea here, or the background on this, very briefly, is the president wants to lower individual and business corporate tax rates. And to make up for that loss of revenue that would obviously come, they will want to do away with all exemptions and credits, and this would be one of them. So, as a organization, American Public Power Association, we are fighting hard, working with our legislators. We met with Adam Schiff, who is very receptive, and we'll be following up with him. But that's really the big takeaway. The cybersecurity, we kind of just want to. Our message as utilities was to keep it with FERC. We think FERC is dialed in, and to kind of expand or get beyond that particular realm, maybe diluting it and getting away from what our core business is. And then some of the other things are at the federal level don't affect us as much, which is sort of streamline the process for hydro projects. Our friends in Pasadena are going through an excruciating process to try to permit a facility that was built many, many years ago. And it's just horrendous. And connected to that is also streamlining the process for fire control, brush clearance around electrical facilities that are on federal lands. So Bureau of Land Management has an extremely onerous permitting process to try to clear brush. We just want to clear the brush. For those of us that have it, just let us clear the brush so it's not a fire hazard. Give us a streamlined process, say yes, be thankful that we're doing it, and let's move on. There's not a whole lot of different ways you can clear brush. It's pretty straightforward, and we know our facilities as well as anyone. So, and as April said, on the state level, things are still coming together. So we'll see. The big issue is the 100% RPS. Yeah. That's a placeholder by Senator De Leon. I think I shared with you at our last meeting that our trip to Sacramento, there was a lot of kind of beating the pulpit about, we aren't going to let California be sucked into this degradation of environmental regulations that the current administration, at least is being, the perception is the current administration is going to pull back on. And we're going to double down, and this is part of that. So it should be interesting to see where this goes. As you know, we just barely passed to 50%. Passed, I mean, the bill just was, 350 was just barely passed, SB 350, with within less than 2 years. So
And that was 50% by
that's
what, 2030?
50% by 2030. So they want to roll the 50% back 5 years to
By 5
2025 and add 100% by 2045. So stay tuned, and we'll keep you posted.
On some of these key bills, including, the position with APPA, do we have a position that we've taken either as a city or as part of an association like APPA?
We've taken it with APPA and SCPPA as well at a local level. So you're familiar with SCPPA, Southern California Public Power Authority, and our role there. They have a lobbying body for legislative and regulatory. So we're dialed in with them as well. And we'll have the mayor will be sending a letter to Congress and to Congressman Schiff about the tax exempt muni bond issue for sure.
And just so I'm clear, the tax exemption for municipal bonds doesn't just apply to public utilities. That would apply to
That's right.
city governments.
I said
Yes.
the city.
So-
It's not just GWP. It's the city, and it's
city as a
every
whole.
city, county in the state of California for everything from rail to.
Just California? I mean, if it's federal
No, I'm sorry,
action,
it's
it
United
would be
States. I'm sorry.
every city in the
parochial
country.
thinker, not
Well,
looking outside of California.
Obviously, we care
Absolutely.
more about that than
Every
other places,
city
but
and county.
every place in the country is
country.
using tax-exempt municipal
Every
bonds to
place
fund
in the
infrastructure. So,
That is correct, and that really is the mother's milk, so to speak, of infrastructure development. And to what it'll do is it'll drive those up and make it less desirable for purchasers, and it'll increase costs, and maybe even have people step back from doing the kind of infrastructure upgrades that are necessary, which means a degradation to the overall infrastructure. And as you all know, our infrastructure isn't in the greatest shape of the world as a country or a state, from every level, from roads to airports to sewers to water to electric. So it's not a good time.
Very interesting time from
Yeah.
a state,
Oh,
and,
yeah.
state and federal
Yes,
perspective. So,
that is so true.
yeah. So thank you for that. Any other comments or questions on this item?
Just that accelerating by 5 years the 50% mark, I'm guessing would have big impacts on our planning in terms of power purchasing.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
we would want to track that very closely, understanding how far out.
Yes. The
Our
20,
development goes.
getting 25% is tough. The next 25% even tougher. So to even shave 5 years off of that, and that's not even looking forward to the next benchmark, which would be the 100%, if that's even possible. And there's a lot of people that don't believe that's even possible. So stay tuned. But yes, it would definitely impact us and every other utility
Right.
in California. But certainly we'll keep you posted on how that goes. And every year, as you know, we bring you a report, an update on a renewable portfolio. So we'll inject whatever impacts this could have on us. Certainly with the 50, but looking ahead to the 100. As you remember, when we gave you the Grayson Repower presentation, there was an IRP, an integrated resource plan. And we had based it on, even though it wasn't law at the time, we had based it on the 50%, anticipating that was going to be passed. Well, we're going to have to make some adjustments to our IRP, and in fact, we're going to engage this next week our consultant to talk about that in anticipation that this does go to 100 and how that changes our outlook for the future. It won't have any significant impact on the repowering of Grayson, but it'll have a lot of impact on other things. It may even make the Grayson repower even more important, but certainly will have a great deal of impact on transmission, or our ability to get transmission and outside generation, and where are we going to get it? Where are we going to get, wherever we find solar and wind or any other viable renewable power source, how are we going to get it here?
Storage as well, which I know.
Storage, yes, storage is a component and one that keeps getting talked about, and we're right on that, and we'll continue to stay on it. It's just, I don't think the two are going to come together fast enough. That's my opinion, but we'll see. So that yes, you're absolutely right, Mr. Camargo. That would go into our IRP as well with a little bit more detail. We kind of touched on it because it was so new, and we were including in that the ability for us to grow that in our new repowered facility. But now it may take on even a little bit different perspective with this in mind.
Can you refresh my memory with the Grayson repowering? It was like going to be 200 something megawatt capacity. when it's all done?
The plant is rated at 250, and for us to repower it would be 250. However, it'll be a little bit different because we have a 50 megawatt unit, a peaking unit that's on site now that we would be able to grandfather in. In other words, keep it. So we'd actually be above the 250, and I think the actual number with permitting would be 238 plus the 50 megawatt unit. So we'd probably be somewhere around 290 megawatts, let's say.
And it's all natural gas,
It is.
correct? Right, so
We have 2 combined cycle units, so you're getting a portion of it is steam generated as well. But yeah, the initial drive on
so that would be
is natural
considered
gas.
cogen? So is part of that going to be able to be accounted for as renewables?
No.
No, not at all.
Nope.
So with the 250, you're anticipating that would be needed to cover the 50% of the load by 2025?
Well, we're going to use that hopefully to help us deliver the
Well-
renewable load, because right now you're talking about solar and wind are the primary factors, and those aren't available all the time. So you need to smooth that electricity, A, to deliver it, and B, you need to have some type of off-time source of energy. So the plant will be combined with that. But right now, we have to pay somebody else to ensure that the electricity is smooth. In other words, you can't deliver it in an up and down manner the way that solar and wind, even on its best day, it reacts. The wind, even if it's blowing all night long, doesn't blow at the same velocity, and the sun doesn't shine the same way all day long. So that has to be, and today, at least today, and I think into the foreseeable future, it's natural gas powered plants that they're used to smooth or get that power even for delivery. Someday maybe storage will be developed that you can store that power and then turn around, but that's a whole other topic.
There's one caveat to Grayson, which is that if we were able to secure a pipeline quality biogas supply, that might be considered a renewable resource.
Well, that's true, but let me that is part of the repower. So there is a whole biogas part to that at Shoal Canyon landfill, which will also be rebuilt, but it's not going to be combined at the existing site like it is. We're going to split it,
right,
and we're going to burn it directly at the source. That will be there.
Right.
And you're right, if there's an opportunity to bring other biogas, but we're not burning it at Grayson because it is, for AQMD, a much dirtier burn.
Right.
So we're going to do it up at the landfill, and we have the ability to expand that facility if we have more biogas.
So is SCPPA dreaming up a position on the potential legislation to maybe think up some cost or reliability off-ramps for the compliance periods that are part of the RPS? Because the mandate will give the vendors in the renewable marketplace a tremendous amount of power over utilities to kind of set prices where they need them to be.
Yes.
And it would behoove the legislature to give some of that market power back to the utilities to, tap the brakes, not forever, but if cost or if there are reliability concerns that make the technology not applicable or not available to meet our spooling reserves or anything.
I think that's an excellent idea. I hope that they have the foresight to do that. To answer your question about SCPPA's preparation, absolutely. Okay. Preparing what those ramifications will be and options. A lot like that we did with 350, but it went anyway.
Yeah.
The oil and gas industry got a break, but the utilities didn't get a break on 350. So, hopefully, we will ramp up between both SCPPA and CMUA, the California Municipal Utilities Association. Both will be working really hard to try to get the Assembly and the Senate and the state to understand what the impacts are. And ultimately, there seems to be a disconnect in what the impact will be to the ratepayer. And our rates are already high. And just from a business attraction standpoint, you might be worried about that. Or from a food production standpoint, this is a great food producing state. Those things we thought would be natural concerns, but they seem to not be. And I know that there's the environmental advantage, and that it not necessarily at any cost, but certainly you're going to pay more, and everybody will tell you that, and we all realize that. You'll pay more for a cleaner environment. We understand that. But the impacts, the true impacts need to be studied a little bit, and I think that's something that it's incumbent upon us, whether it's through SCPPA, CMUA, or altogether, conveying to the legislature.
Yeah, it just kind of takes time for some of these technologies to mature. I mean, certainly, most renewables have started to come down, but storage remains. If storage is going to be a part of the solution and how you get either to 50% or certainly to 100%, those costs are still very high.
Yeah.
And yeah, you make a good point. So, you pay more for a clean environment, but we also need to balance, strikes me that for our customers, we need to balance the cost versus the benefit, so that there's time to, and if we can allow time for those costs to come down as the technologies for storage mature, I think our customers benefit.
Precisely. And, our kind of thinking now, just, as we discuss it, is you kind of see a repowered Grayson, if in fact the proposed project is approved. You see that kind of going into effect, and we certainly wouldn't keep Grayson as long as we've kept this Grayson. But you can see then to begin to transition into the next technology, which would be, I think, the battery storage for a great deal. And by then you can see prices coming down, the technology having advanced, the operation side of the business with us understanding better how to use it. And then that throws into the whole transmission dynamic where you're not as dependent on transmission. So we're going away from a transmission-based sort of philosophy to a more locally generated and locally stored energy, whether that's rooftop solar, battery storage, community solar for multifamily or business type things. So, and those are all things we're looking at and trying to prepare ourselves for that future. But I don't, that's not something that's going to come right away. We just need to start getting ready and be prepared for it. So, yeah, but you're absolutely right. Is, you can't just sort of step off that cliff and say we're ready. Without knowing what all the impacts are going to be, but some way to slowly ramp that. And maybe somebody would argue that 2045 is plenty of time for us to ramp that. I'm not sure, but we'll see.
Okay, good discussion. Anything further on this topic before we move on?
Well, I've been following this discussion very closely, and there are a lot of very interesting issues here. But certainly the nexus between the changing landscape of natural gas at the state level, and then our own development of the natural gas plant. I do have a lot of thoughts, but one question I want to ask is, has there been any discussion about, in addition to biogas, using other forms of renewable natural gas or sourcing renewable natural gas for Grayson? So not just the gas that we're producing at Shoal Canyon, but potential other sources of renewable natural gas, because that with the pressure from new legislation, that may be one way that we meet those goals.
Well, a couple of things with that. At this point in time, you're looking at biogas is the alternative, the accepted alternative. And we have it naturally occurring at Shoal Canyon, and we've been harnessing that, and we want to continue to do that. In fact, even improve it, because at this point in time, the way that we do it, the quality is so degraded just naturally that we have to mix it with natural gas. The proposed plant that we want to replace the existing infrastructure with would burn at 100%. Now, could we bring more in? Well, you can only bring it in from California because of all the renewables. The state has said that biogas has to be California, homegrown. We can get solar from outside the state. We can get wind from outside the state. We can get geothermal, hydro, and any other acceptable renewable outside the state. We cannot get biogas outside the state.
I did not know that.
So if we import that from Arizona, it is worthless to us. It's not even worth it. You wouldn't pursue it because it just wouldn't be worth it. So that kind of leaves you with what's developed here, and most of what's developed here sits with an entity that is already using it. So there is an opportunity. Could we produce more? If you're familiar, and I don't know that I've mentioned that we're pursuing a potential anaerobic digestion project at Shoal Canyon. So that it's primarily an organic waste processing, and it's using tried and true anaerobic digestion, which has been used for years in the wastewater treatment business. It's widely accepted, and when I say that, it's widely accepted technologically. It's widely accepted by environmental advocacy groups as a good, clean technology, and it produces a very good quality gas. You control the input of the fuel, and by doing that, you can control the output, which is the gas. So it's much richer, much more desirable than what naturally occurs in landfill, where you can't control the input. Here we would use, as I said, organic waste. We'd use some levels of waste paper that aren't recycled, and that would produce another different type of gas that we would then be able to use as well. It's a very costly project. We haven't got all the figures in, but I can tell you it's very, very expensive. So any of these processes can be very, very costly. But at this point in time, looking at other opportunities for biogas, they're very, very limited. So, and there's other options, geothermal. So, there's a big push in geothermal, especially in the Salton Sea area. So there had been, we have some geothermal in our portfolio. We're taking a look to see if that might be something that would be worth our while to increase. Obviously, geothermal runs all the time. It isn't dependent on the sun or the wind or Mother Nature at all. It's there and it's producing. And again, it gets to how it's processed, how much it costs, and how we get it here. And then hydro, we'll look at hydro. So at this point in time, but we'll continue to look at different opportunities.
Keep us posted.
You
Thanks.
bet.
Okay. Yeah. Very good. Thank you. Next item.
4B, water conservation update.
President Camargo, members of the commission, my name is Michael DeGhetto, Chief AGM for Water, and I'm going to give you our monthly water conservation update. So from May of 2015 through January 2017, GWP's customers have saved 3.3 billion gallons of water. We're currently in phase 2, which is limited to 3 days per week watering. And recently, the City Council extended the temporary delay in the drought charge until June 30th of 2017. So the State Water Board also extended their emergency regulation through October, and they're supposed to come out with an update in May or June, depending on the conditions throughout the state. So we'll come back to council before June with a recommendation. And again, we pretty much leveled off around 20% conservation, pretty consistently, and 21% overall cumulatively. And again, a lot of that has to do with, if we look at January of 2016, we only had 16%. We've got 20% in January of 2017, and it's really because of the rain. Really drives use. And again, like I usually mention, so we're in phase 2, which is 3 days a week watering. And all the normal water waste and all those kind of policies are in effect, regardless of which phase that we're in. And we've got online information on how to change your lawn, how to change your yard, use drought-tolerant plants, and how to conserve water at home. That's all I got. I had a really short presentation this time. So.
It's been right.
Yes, that's good news.
We noticed.
Any comments or questions for Mr. DeGhetto? Nope, hearing none.
I guess we'll have to wait for another couple of months to see what the melt is going to be like, so we know how quickly the water is going to be coming down and how much we're going to have for the summer.
Yes.
And we really need to hear from the state and what they come up with as well.
Okay. So we're just sort of watching and waiting right now.
Yep.
Okay.
And they're in an interesting situation, too, because I don't think they quite know. And, April indicated some of us were back in Washington, and you get a sort of a chuckle when you tell people from California, they go, you guys were in a desert like a year ago, and today you have more water than you can hold. And so it's very, very interesting. But, it's a good thing. And another year of drought we avoided, and we'll see how far this goes, and we are able to contain it and channel it and work it. And we've got facilities in California that haven't seen this much water in quite some time. Lake Cachuma, I understand, is only about 50% filled, but that's a lot higher than it's been in many, many, many years. And so, and of course, you've seen on the news with the dams up north that are actually under so much pressure from the amount of water. There's infrastructure concerns and seismic concerns. So it'll be interesting to see what the state does. A lot of issues at hand. I think on the one hand, Mike said this before, they have a desire to want to keep this going so that this becomes a way of life. On the other hand, it's hard to keep people kind of keep your thumb on folks when it's been this wet and there's that much water and there's so much publicity about that amount of water. So stay tuned.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. DeGale. Next item, please.
4C, reliability report.
Hi, good afternoon. Ramon Abueg, Chief Assistant General Manager for Electric and Power Supply. So every year, about this time of the year, I give you an update on where we are with our reliability. So this is our 5-year reliability report. As you know, it's an ongoing contiguous report that we provide just to track how we're doing on an annual basis. So just a summary, these are the 3 indices that we track very closely. The SAFE, which is the System Average Interruption Frequency Index, which basically it states that if you live in Glendale, this is how many outages you can expect to have in a year. Our goal is to have a SAFE of 1. For SAIDI, it's the System Average Interruption Duration Index, which basically says that if you do have an outage, you live in Glendale, what can you expect on an average? Our goal is to be under 40 minutes. And KD is the Customer Average Interruption Duration Index, which is the average outage. If you do experience the outage, this is what you can expect our response time will be and when we can get your power back in service. And again, our goal with that is about 40 minutes, or it's 40 minutes, not about. So what we try to do to track how we're doing, So under the IEEE standards, there are some exceptions that's required. So some people would say, I've been out for 3 times today, but if it's inside their facility, we don't count that. So this is about outages that happens in our system, that's within our system. But if there's a major event like, God forbid, another windstorm, we can actually exempt that. We don't exempt that currently, so that's included in this report. Or if we had an outage caused by our neighboring utility, that would be exempted from this report. So where are we? So there are 2 comparisons we want to make. One comparison is between us and the IOUs. And as you can see in the last, in the SAIFI, we're doing much better except for San Diego. Of all the IOUs, Sempra or San Diego has been doing very well. They have a very good program with respect to their indices, but we fare well compared to the other 2 large IOUs. As you can see, in 2014, we're slightly higher. 2015, we got better. And there's a note here. Our comparison only goes up to 2015 because the IOUs are slightly behind in updating their records with, and we get the records directly from the PUC website. Okay, so we're currently meeting our standards up to 2015, and you'll see the 2016 data as we go to when we compare ourselves to the other POUs. For SAIDI, we went slightly higher in 2015, and we were over our 40 minutes goal. And just to give you some background, we do run into longer outage recoveries on 2 occasions. One, if it happens late at night or on weekends, we don't have standby crews and we have to bring them in. And the other issue is if we have a cable failure, and there are times that we can't find what the failure is, and we'll try it, and we keep trying it. So those are the 2 things that we're the cable one, we're trying to resolve that and find a better way and try to install some technologies to help us locate the fault a lot better. So unlike overhead systems, cable systems, unless somebody hears an explosion or we actually force it to fail, it's very difficult for us to locate what the problem is. But Katie, same thing. In 2015, it's mainly because of we had more cable failures than we anticipated. But as you can see, we're trying to stay within the 40 minutes, and you will see in 2016 it's gotten a little better in some category. So compared to our friends at the POUs, similarly. We're going up and down in this cycle. In 2016, we've had bigger events. SCPPA, by the way, we're always going to realized that, or I've realized that we cannot always catch up with some of our neighbors. The reason being, our feeders have a lot more customers than they do. We have feeders that could have, one of the feeders we have has about 11,000 customers on it. So if that feeder goes out, that really skews the safety that we have. But if we compare the feeder size by feeder size, I think we'll do better, but it's just hard to extrapolate that. Okay? So, again, unfortunately, this year or the past year, 2016, we're above our 1.0 goal, but we're making some improvements. I think by 2017, you'll see some improvements. Sadie, we went over again 2 years in a row, but the one thing that I really like to point out is that our response time has always been what we're really proud of. Although our SAIDI, which is for the overall system, the KD, that the actual outages, we're below the 40 minutes, which is our goal. So we're really proud of this. Then this is our 5-year cost of outages. And I want to point out that one of the issues we really have in Glendale, I don't know why Mylar balloons are attracted in Glendale, but 20% of our outages in the last 5 years, and almost the last dozen outages that we've had in Glendale, except for the winter or the storm-related outage, has been due to Mylar balloons. And let me just show you what, to the audience, I need to use that. What happens with Mylar balloons? So we do this in our utility day, demonstrate how Mylar balloons really affect us. And I don't know if you can see it, the Mylar balloon does not have to make contact with the power lines to cause an outage. All it needs to do is bridge that arc or the distance between the two lines, then it would create an arc and cause an outage. So we discourage or are asking our residents that Mylar balloons are pretty if they stay on the ground and not to go up in the air. So, and then every year we run into some major events. The last major event we had was the big rainfall that we had, big storm, on February 17th, and we did experience some feeder outages. And it shows here we have 6 feeder outages, and this is a good testimony of how much improvements we've made in our system. In previous years, every time we have a major storm, we experience a lot more outages and a lot more customers affected. So in this case, we had 6 outages. Main causes are mainly trees and palm fronds. Either the trees or the branches are falling, or the palm fronds are basically blown by the wind into our power lines. A total of about 8,000 customers are affected, and our duration outages, unfortunately, some of them lasted more than 40 minutes, but because some of the trees that fell, as you can see here, this takes us a while. And what takes us is to make it safe, to remove the tree damage, and then do the restoration. So we had a few of this that happened during this past winter storm, but again, it's very, very few customers were affected. So I mentioned this, so we have palm fronds and tree limbs, and during the high winds we still have some wires that would make incidental contacts, but this is where our program with the reclosers have helped us. Is they make contact, it would trip the feeder, then we would restore it automatically within 10 seconds, but we still count those. We've had a few broken poles, cross arms, and we had service wires that dropped, and again, that's because of the pressure coming from the trees, just pulling it off of the houses. So what are we doing about trees, since I've talked about it? I wish I could do something about Mylar balloons, but currently I can't. But the ones we can control, we have a very, very proactive tree trimming program. We trim that about 10 feet away from the lines, both primary and secondary. We have a cycle that we follow, and a big help to us this year were the palm fronds that Public Works through Mr. Zurn's help. They're trimming the palm fronds on the public right of way. And that, I think, helped us reduce some of the outages we had because of the palm front. So the proactive approach has been helping us. And another program that we're doing that helps us in this time during a storm is our conversion from 4 kV to 12 kV. Not only are we making our system more efficient by spreading the wires because of the separation between 4 kV and 12 kV on the overhead, we separate the wires a little further, and that's been helping us eliminate some of the tree contacts by not causing a short across the wires because of the gap. It's a lot farther apart, and they don't tend to stay and complete that bridge. So that's it for our reliability. Again, we missed some of our goals, but we're working towards getting below where we needed to be. But in comparison, we're still doing much better than some of our neighbors.
And I'll just add a couple of things to that. You saw that our longest outage was 159 minutes, and I can tell you that seems like a long time, but in comparison to other utilities during that same period of time, that's not much at all. I can tell you from a personal experience at a utility that will remain nameless, that my child is a customer of. It was 27 hours without power, and it was a tree branch that fell on it. I know the hours because my 2 grandchildren were at my house for most of those 27 hours. Because
you can probably tell us how many minutes it was.
We had a slumber party, and I can tell you how many times I watched Angry Birds. I can definitely tell you that. But you know, and that goes with any time you see an event like that. We have responded very, very well. And we are extremely comparable to any other utilities that get into that situation. That's a testament to the men and women of our department and the guys who go out there and just get it done. And they were working constantly. So I'm proud of them, and I think the community's proud of them. They were honored last week at the city council meeting. And I think it's just a testament to them. But it is, again, here's the benefit of local utility and having a good, solid local utility that can respond when the chips are really down. The other thing Mr. Abueg alluded to was the Mylar balloons. And so kind of tying in the legislation, we have tried at least twice in my almost 5 years with the utility. We pushed at the state level to try to get some relief from that. But believe it or not, the Mylar balloon lobby and all that goes with it, so party planning folks, the folks who make the actual balloons, florists and those kind of things, have much more clout than investor-owned and publicly owned electric utilities, believe it or not, and that's been shot down pretty much every time. So, our objective had been to try to find a material that was more conducive, that would give you the same level of property, but it's at the same time protect the system. But we're not quite there. We'll keep trying. We'll see what we can do. We had an outage today, for instance. It was the cause of Mylar balloons that actually blackened an intersection where there was a traffic accident. So. You know, these are things that just could be avoided, and unfortunately they occur because of this. So, and Ramon mentioned the palm fronds. We just went on a much more aggressive palm tree trimming, and thanks to Public Works, we picked up the tab for that, but it was well worth the expense, and it showed in this storm, and I think we're going to catch up even further, and you'll see that as time goes on. For those of you that just drive through the city, you probably saw less palm fronds laying around. There was still a lot, no doubt, but probably less than you had the last storm we had a year and a half ago or so. So that's an indication we're doing a better job. And those things are probably right there with squirrels and Mylar balloons as being problems, especially when the wind blows.
I think we reduced the population of squirrels recently. I haven't seen too many squirrel problems.
Speak to my dog about that. We're on it.
Well, I hope your dog helps us by making sure they don't make it up the hole.
Yeah. But so the Mylar balloon industry is protected from any type of liability in the case of an outage that causes, for instance, a traffic accident. They're not in any way liable for that. No, because you can't. One, you can't trace a balloon. Two, when the balloon is sold, it's sold with a weight on it, so it's all in the control of the owner, and the owner, whoever that is, whether they let it go intentionally or on accident, it gets up there and it does what it does. And I think in this case, the balloons were actually in a tree. As Mr. Abueg alluded to, they don't have to be in the wires. This was in a tree next to it and just close enough, and there it went. So
we just, whatever we can do. We put the word out, and that's really where we're at now. We put the word out heavily, especially graduation, Valentine's Day, because these are still Valentine's Day residuals that we're feeling, and you'll see the bump goes up. So those times of year, Christmas is also those times of year that we try to push hard to please keep those inside. If you're done with them, please, deflate them and throw them away properly. So that's our only message.
What about legislation just that they would be sold with some kind of warning similar to what they do for, buildings where when you walk in, there's a warning that says this building may have chemicals known to the state of California to cause cancer. I mean, couldn't we mandate, instead of banning them, at least having consumer warnings on them?
Could, and I don't know for a fact if they have some kind of label, if it's even required, but that's certainly something to look at. Yeah, as an interim.
Could we require them not to be filled with helium, or at least not pure helium?
That was the legislation that we were pushing for that got shut down.
Really?
Yes. Mr. Zurn mentioned twice.
Mr. Blake's had more.
Well, I mean, when I was working in the legislature, Jack Scott was just trying to ban them outright. I mean, he tried 2 or 3 times with that bill to ban Mylar balloons sales.
Yes. So from research we did, the banning of Mylar balloons started at least 25 years ago, and every time we lost.
Generation.
Well, if at first you don't succeed.
So just a comment and a question. So comment would be, if you look at the data here, if it were not for Glendale Water and Power, I presume most folks in Glendale would be getting there, dealing with the types of interruptions and durations of interruptions that you would see under the LADWP. So that's certainly favorable. The question I would have is, Mr. Abueg, you talked about SDG&E under SAFE, where they tend to do it particularly well. Are there any lessons to be learned from SDG&E and how they maintain that low SAFE rate?
No, I do not have the details. We have not tried to make contacts with them. But if you look at the record, time and time again, every time we compare them with the other IOUs, they're just doing so much better. I think they just pay more attention to their maintenance program. But we haven't spoken with them directly, and we can to get some lessons learned.
Very good. Might be insightful. So any other comments or questions on this item?
Just a question. What communications are you having with Glendale Water and Power customers about what they can be doing on their own property to help limit power outages?
So when we notice that the trees are in the near the wires, if it's a private property, they have an option. They either trim it or we would come in and bring our contractors to do it. And we put them on notice. And we also do a lot of, in terms of Mylar balloons, like Mr. Zurn, when there's a holiday coming out, we do send out through our app and now in the source that they should be watching out for those.
Social media as well.
Social media as well. The trees, however, it can become a little bit more personal and more emotional because some of our residents are attached to their trees. So we try to communicate with them how important it is for them to trim it. Those are the 2 main issues that we deal with respect to our residents.
Any other comments or questions? No, hearing none. Thank you, Mr. Abueg.
Thank you very much.
Next item, please.
4D, Water Storage Assessment and Operational Plan.
President Camargo, members of the commission, my name is Michael DeGhetto, Chief AGM for Water at Glendale Water and Power. And I'm going to talk a little bit about our water storage assessment and operational plan. And the first thing I wanted to do is introduce the staff from the operations group, if they could stand up. So the reason I brought them is, I'm going to go over the plan and talk about all those things, but, that's the staff that runs our facilities, our pump stations, our reservoirs, and all those kind of things. So, talking about it and thinking about it and whatnot, they're the ones that go out and implement it. So I just wanted to recognize them here.
Very good. Thank you for your service.
So there's 6 team members, which isn't a lot, who do 24/7, 365 oversight, monitoring, and operation of the facilities. They visit each site once per day, and 2 team members, and I got corrected on this, 410 shifts, So there's a schedule where we have weekend coverage. Like we already have planned coverage on the weekends. The day they overlap is on a Wednesday. And then 14 members rotate after-hour duties to monitor operations remotely and respond to alarms. And to put it in context, so we've got really two water systems. We've got our potable system and our recycled system. We've got 22 pressure zones, 32 reservoirs and tanks, 31 pump stations. And then at those facilities, there's 72 pumps and motors. We've got 16 wells, 6 interconnections, 3 pressure regulating stations, 2 treatment plants. We've got 5 chemical facilities, 2 turbine generators. We have 6 dams in our system. And then we've got our SCADA system that kind of monitors and oversees all that. And so the operations folks are the ones that manage all of this. And when I talk about the SCADA system, it's the supervisory control and data acquisition system. And basically what happens is at each site, it'll have a programmable logic controller, which is essentially a small computer that monitors the operations at that site, and it has the set points and things like that built in that tell the pumps when to come on, when to go off. And that PLC is what communicates to the SCADA system. And we do that over a wireless communication network, our Tropos system, which is the same system that we put in for our advanced metering infrastructure. And that's how we do that remote monitoring at night, is through that SCADA. The operators have laptops where they can log in and look at the system. So when I talk about the operational plan, what we did is we set some priorities that we want to look at as kind of the philosophy to run the system. And first we want to ensure that there's sufficient fire flow. We want to maintain proper water quality in our system. We want to minimize energy consumption. We want to then use our plan to establish our system control set points. And then we also want to use our plan to help us when we perform our condition assessments of our assets, and then influence our decision making regarding asset replacements and rehabilitations. And so I'll go over each one of these things in the next slides. So when I talk about fire flow requirements for a water system is a quantifiable minimum amount of flow or volume that you need for an area based on the zoning or land use in that area. And really to determine that, how much storage you need, if you're just looking at storage, it's, the volume is equal to the rate times time. And then I give an example. If you had an area, maybe a commercial area, where you had 3,500 GPM for 4 hours, you'd come up with 840,000 gallons. And then that would help you determine how big you should make a tank or a reservoir in that area. You could also supply that area with just a pump. If you had a 3,500 GPM pump, it would accomplish that same idea. So it's a combination of both the pumping and the storage. And then for water quality purposes, it's a little bit of a competing purpose to fire flow. So every staff member in our water division, their primary goal is water quality. And the things that happen in that really is related to disinfection, which destroys or deactivates pathogenic organisms in the water. And one thing that we always have to think about is the water chemistry continuously changes over time, and it changes due to temperature fluctuations and things like that in the reservoirs. So it's really important for us to reduce the detention time of the water in the reservoirs and tanks to maintain water quality, which is almost the opposite of, hey, I just want that 840,000 gallons sitting there in case I need it. So it's kind of like turnover. It's like stock rotation or something like that you would have even in like a food service kind of industry.
So, Mr. DeGhetto, can I ask you a
Yes.
question on that? So the detention time, do we have a range that we look to try to do within the city, or does it kind of depend on the time of year, or how do you get to the appropriate detention time?
That's a really good question. It does depend on the time of year. because our demands fluctuate. So in the summer, when we have really high demands, we get better turnover than in the winter. And so what we'll end up doing is we'll have our summer and winter set points in the reservoirs that then, going backwards through that same equation, we can determine how much water to store. And detention times, it's really dependent, and that's one of the things that we looked at when we did our detailed analysis for this study, is you can look at the source where the water is generated, say from a well or from what we would consider our MWD connection. And then you can, just from a gross look at it, at the furthest point in the system, you can see how old that water is. So we're trying to minimize the amount of time, but maybe like a goal to set would be something around a week or so at the longest. Sometimes it's longer, and it's just longer because of how the system's laid out. And sometimes it's shorter. One of the, in addition to fire flow, there's also demand in the system. So there's some parts or some zones in our system where demand and the need to have a certain amount of storage is really related more to demand than to fire flow. So like in the bigger zones, maybe it's demand that's overriding that. And if that's the case, then a turnover could be like a day. Because you'll always have that amount to meet fire flow in that system, but you have much more turnover and much more regular turnover in those zones.
Thank you.
And then as far as energy goes, and I talked about this a little bit in the last week or last month. Again, works force time distance. So we use about 21 million kilowatt hours to pump water to all the customers in Glendale. About $2.5 million out of our budget is spent on that. Then we start at 483 feet above sea level, and our highest zone is 2483. And there's 12 different pressure zones in between. So each gallon of water has energy in it because a gallon of water weighs 8.3 pounds per gallon. And Commissioner Chan, you'd asked me like how much it would cost for each customer, and it really depends on where you live, like which pressure zone you're in, and how much water you use to be able to back out that cost for each customer. So that's something we could figure out, but it just really depends. And to give kind of a view of what I'm talking about, that 483 feet, and I think I spoke about this before. That's a similar elevation to where we're at here at City Hall, and our reservoir that's serving us. And there's more than one reservoir, but it's up at 724 feet, so we're in that 724-foot zone. And then I show another one, like the 968 zone, and then as you go up the hills, that's how those pressure zones work. So it's important to operate the system efficiently and, say, pump water the least amount of distance or the least amount of height that you need to pump it. And then finally, using those kind of overriding philosophy gets into our asset management and how we're going to design, construct, evaluate, and rehabilitate or decommission and plan new assets. And like that tank I'm showing, that's one that we did a rehabilitation where we redid the coating for that tank. But using our plan and our philosophy is we'll take a look at that and make sure that's the right size. And we wouldn't necessarily replace it one for one either. If it was a tank, maybe that was sized when demands were much higher, or maybe was sized and then some development didn't happen or something like that. We would take a look and we'd only replace it with something we needed to meet those demands and to meet that philosophy. So, any questions?
Questions on this topic?
I have a question. Are there metrics that you use to monitor, like your progress from year to year?
Our progress related to
Your operational plan?
So the plan's brand new.
Okay.
And really to answer that, a metric that we use is when I talk about disinfection, it's related to how much chemicals we have to add to the reservoirs. Like ideally, if we had the exact right amount of turnover, we wouldn't have to add disinfection once it entered the system because it would get used soon enough that we didn't have to add any more disinfection chemicals. So that's a metric that we use, is reducing that. The other metric would be, again, our energy costs. So if we're sure that we're pumping as efficiently as possible, those costs should go down.
Right, and those would be evaluated
Yes.
annually.
I don't know that there's a perfect answer for any particular water agency. And let me just like boil down to what the impetus was for this, and it was the detention issue and the longevity of the detention. So Mike and his staff have done a tremendous job, but I would be remiss if I didn't give some credit to Mr. Abueg. Where is he? Is he hiding? Mr. Abueg, who had the unenvious task of managing the water operation among his other duties, and that's when he discovered that we were probably holding too much water. And so it started as a very basic concept of, why, do we need to hold water for 300 days? What's the quality of that water, even though it's been treated? How much money are we paying to treat it? Why are we keeping levels that high? And some of the answers we were getting were probably dated in their reasoning. And Mike did a great job of coming in and giving it a fresh look. So it was just a matter of trying to hold the right amount of water, whatever that is. And the right amount of water may be something that changes monthly, seasonally. But our goal is to try to keep it at that optimum level so that we are reducing the cost of treating the water, reducing the cost of any other utilities or anything that go with the water. Do we need to pump unnecessarily? And trying to find that sweet spot and just being conscious of it. And I don't know that we were doing that to no fault of anybody. It's just the way we did it. It's sort of like fill it up. We don't need to fill it up. And we have a pretty extensive, redundant detention reservoir system. So take advantage of that and try to improve the system. And Mike, as I said, and his staff have done a great job. So this was just a goal and objective Mike's had since he started here, and he got it done. And it's just another improvement. Another thing Mike is working on is just day-to-day stuff. How can we reduce our energy consumption in our water operation? And the water division is probably one of the top electrical users in the city. That won't be good for revenues on the electrical side. So it's just I'm torn between that. But at the same time, for our water customers, the ability to reduce our cost to help reduce the impact to them. So,
Yeah, I'm looking at the items under operational plan, and it all looks really good. So I was just curious about the metrics. And so when did this program start? You said it's new.
So we just finished our assessment. I just finalized it last month. And we've been working on it for a while. And like Mr. Zurn said, prior to that, we call it system optimization. And that's something I work with the operations staff quite a bit on because, I can sit in the office and do some math and look at a schematic, but, we've got to go run it and see if it works too, right? So they have to be, you got to see what happens and how the system responds to that. Because not to get, I always try not to be like really technical. I only gave one equation this time, but
There were two.
were there two?
Yeah.
Okay.
Not that I was counting.
It's not just like I talk about those elevations, but there's also a dynamic portion to that. So when demands in a certain area change, there's head loss and whatnot in the pipes. So we actually have to go out and run it and really see then how it responds. I guess to put it as simply as I could.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Okay, sounds great. Thank you.
Any other comments, questions? Mr. DeGhetto? No?
Did you have any? Oh, okay. I don't have any questions, but I do have just one kind of thanks for you and your staff. I've lived in a number of jurisdictions in and out of the state of California with varying degrees of water quality, and I've never had to worry about, turning on the tap and getting what comes out of it. So that is not something to be taken for granted, as we've seen in other jurisdictions like Flint. So I want to thank you and your staff for the constant diligence in making sure that water quality here is pretty stellar.
All right, you're welcome.
Agreed. Thank you very much. Okay, next item.
5, oral communications. Discussion is limited to items not part of this agenda. Each speaker is allowed 5 minutes. Commission may question or respond to the speaker, but there will be no debate or discussion. The General Manager may refer the matter to the appropriate staff for investigation and report.
Madam Clerk, I have no cards here. Do you have any?
I do not.
Comment cards? Okay. Very good. So next item.
6, agenda forecast.
So fellow commissioners, thoughts on the agenda forecast? Additions, comments, changes? I have a couple of things I wanted to mention. But then, any? So two things. One, I did. While I was not at the last meeting, I did watch the replay online, and just have a question regarding sort of the next steps there. So, but one of the key next steps is going to be in the CEQA process, right? Where we'll have a draft EIR. I don't recall the timing of that, but one sort of meta comment for the agenda would be to maybe look at appropriate times through the CEQA process, where maybe we consider having another update on the Grayson repower, and perhaps the draft EIR might be an appropriate time frame.
Yeah, we
can
could
add
do
that
it.
to the agenda,
I don't know that that'll do it justice. We may do more than one for you.
So
we're in a critical 14-month period. This is the next 14 months are critical. So to the extent DIR, definitely we may have at least one more update. So we'll work it in when we have something that is I'm looking at maybe something that changes, something that's not just same old and take your time unnecessarily, but it may be more than one. So we'll work that in at the right time.
Now, would there separately, or I guess as part of the CEQA process, be a public meeting associated with the
Yes.
with the release of the draft EIR?
Yes.
Yeah. And do you recall what that timing is?
We don't have it yet.
Don't have the timing.
That's right.
Okay, understood.
So that's what I was referring to. Is as soon as I get more of the firm dates, then we can bring those back. I'm just as I struggle trying to think ahead to some benchmarks, important benchmarks that we may want to come back on. But likely we can come back with the EIR and probably sometime a year from now, for sure, right before we get ready to go with what will be the final decision on it.
Very good. So let's I guess we keep that on the long-range radar. My other comment as it relates to the agenda would be there was some recent coverage regarding water rates and Prop 218.
The coverage in the news press?
Yes, coverage in the news press regarding that court decision. So don't know where we're headed there as a city, but certainly as it relates to water rates and rate making, that would be an item that I'd like to suggest we think about an appropriate time to address that matter with this commission. So,
for sure, Mr. President, you would see that when the new COSA is completed, depending on what occurs. But we'll absolutely be working at least the tiered rate issue. As far as the court case, and I mentioned the news press report that made it sound like it occurred yesterday. That was a January decision, so it only took them a couple months to get to it. Sorry, just saying. But if you'd like, we can. We have released publicly the basic issue that occurred. We've put that in our publications, our city publications. There was some there was some social media indications that were false that we corrected through our rumor page. But we could, I imagine, can give you an overview of the judge's ruling.
Okay.
Or, we can either do it here or we could send you a copy of it. But as I said, for sure, whatever and I'm hesitating because it's active. The council still has to consider it and decide whether they want to continue through an appeal process.
Right.
But for sure, this is something that you will get back to you in the form of rate discussion. But that's probably a year from now.
Okay.
By the time the coast is complete and we bring it back to you with what the options are and what some of our recommendations would be, that would incorporate obviously anything that's taken place in the court case. And also, as I said, we'll have some options. Just even if the outcome hasn't been finally decided, we'll have some options that will look ahead towards decisions one way or the other, so that we're prepared.
Okay.
In that regard.
So, folks on the commission interested in having that type of briefing?
Yes.
Okay, so, one alternative would be a nearer term overview of what the judgment is at the trial court versus a longer term look at the impact on the COSA. Which of those, or perhaps both?
So probably both, but I would say for the near term and for this, so somewhere I would think in this time frame here, the next 6 months or so, having a briefing and the overview on the judge's ruling. So I think that would be in the next.
We could do
as
that
early as next
sooner
month.
Rather than later. Quite frankly, the other issue I wouldn't even be able to tell you at this point in time. We have no definitive,
Right.
Based on we're still trying to get some specifics on what exactly he said, and then looking at those impacts. I wouldn't even have anything to really tell you. But certainly Christine could go over the judge's ruling.
I appreciate that. Comment?
Yeah, no, I think a briefing on the judge's ruling seems appropriate at this point, but I think if we're going to go anything beyond that while the council is still deciding what the next steps are in litigation, I don't think we want to start talking about remedies or anything like that until until the council's made a decision about where to go with the lawsuit.
Yeah, we wouldn't do anything beyond that.
It would be definitely an informational item for the commission. It would not be one where we'd ask for direction or a motion to council.
Okay.
Very good. Any other comments or questions regarding the agenda forecast? Hearing none. Okay. Next item, please.
7, adjournment.
Okay. So with respect to adjournment, I'd like to make a motion that we adjourn today's meeting of the Glendale Water and Power Commission in honor of. Gentleman who was on staff for many, many years and passed away. If I can get a second, what I'd like to do is read something into the record.
I second.
Very good. Appreciate that. So this is Gary Hollins, and I'd like to read something into the record for this meeting of the Commission. It is with great sorrow that we mourn the sudden passing of former longtime GWP employee Gary Hollins, who passed away unexpectedly on March 1st, 2017. He retired from the city in December 2016. Mr. Hollins started working for the Glendale Water and Power on March 1, 1984 as an electric mechanic apprentice. He worked his way up to electric system dispatch supervisor in 2004 and worked in this capacity until he retired in December 2016. Gary was very knowledgeable about the electric system. He is the one we counted on to restore the system back from a major event such as earthquakes and major windstorms. He provided training to GWP employees as well as our neighboring utilities and other utilities throughout the state regarding system restoration. He had designed several scenarios to encourage outside-the-box thinking to challenge dispatchers on how to safely and efficiently restore electrical systems from major blackouts. He was a good man with a good heart, always willing to help whenever he could. We will miss him as a colleague, a co-worker, and mostly as a friend. Our thoughts and prayers are with Gary's family during these very trying times. So with that, we will adjourn this meeting of the Glendale Water and Power Commission in honor of Gary Hollins. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.